Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome back to the stage Executive Director of Hyperledger, Brian Behlendorf.
We're back on the train.
Hello, and welcome back. So this is the part of every Hyperledger event where we try to make it less about me on stage under the spotlights and more about us as a community, to try to just kind of get a sense for what people's experiences here were like. Are there outstanding questions? A chance to ask questions kind of us as Hyperledger staff, but also kind of reflect what was the value of kind of doing this as an event, and what more could we learn? Before we go down that path, I want to kind of highlight again, we have 3 more days of things if you're interested in joining us for. We've got 2 days of workshops that the agenda for those are in the in the Socio app, as well as obviously on the website. But that's really a way to get, as developers, or even as somebody who isn't a developer but just wants to learn more about what are these technologies about, a chance to get in and understand them at perhaps even a different and deeper level than you've had today. Today and yesterday. One recent addition to that, taking advantage of the fact that Jonathan Levy from Hysera is able to join us, is that tomorrow from 10:45 to 11:15, he'll give a demo of the Unbound network. This was the thing I showed in my keynote, which is really a directory of all the different enterprise blockchain deployments out there. So if you're interested in it and have some ideas about kind of where it can be extended or taken, definitely come to that. It'll be really cool. Let's see, and then obviously again, Saturday and Sunday, there's the Hackathon for Good that Accenture and Hyperledger are putting together. There's still room for registration on site. Even if you can just show up on Saturday and be part of kind of the ideation of a team, or the kind of the work, even that would be valuable, potentially interesting. And I do also want to thank, obviously we've had a lot of great support here from our sponsors. Great support out there in the foyer with, I think I found that really valuable to have folks there talking about their companies and their products. I hope you all agree. One important, in addition to sponsorships of the party last night, thank you to Amex for that, and some of the other things. We've also had sponsorship of a number of individuals to be able to attend here who otherwise would not be able to attend. We call those our diversity scholarships, and I want to thank DTCC and Accenture for helping sponsor those. Yeah. Very cool. And I'll do other things at the end of this kind of session. But for now, I kind of want to understand, how did you guys, how did it come across? I mean, any thoughts that you had, things that you learned today that you didn't expect to learn today or yesterday at the different sessions? This is our first event, right? This is, we've done a couple of events specifically at the developer level. We've done a few for our own membership. And we always kind of wondered, hey, there's way too many blockchain events. There's a lot of hype and noise at them. But we felt finally in 2018, there was enough commercial deployment and enough of a growing external community beyond just the developers that it was time to start explaining that to the world. We knew that the end of the year would be a tough time perhaps to get people to events. We knew that you couldn't pick any location in the world without it being difficult to get to from somebody from our community, because we're a very global community. But we felt Basel, and we felt the week before Christmas, I guess 2 weeks before Christmas, wouldn't be a bad time. But everything is up to conversation, and everything in Hyperledger, if we do our job right, should be a function of what the community tells us, right? And so I really want to kind of get into more of a listening mode. I've got a lot of my staff here as well who can help kind of answer some of these questions, but we're just channelers of the energy that comes from the developer community and comes from those of you here. So anybody want to start? We have people with microphones kind of roaming around. Anyone want to start with an opening kind of observation? Maybe a session you heard today that you thought was actually really good, or something you had kind of an issue with. We're very, as you can tell from the conversations we've had here, we're very open to a full range of opinions. So thanks for bringing the house lights up. And we have a question in the back there? Okay, great.
Thank you, Brian, for this wonderful event. And I have a question, actually two. The first one is, what's the background or reason for choosing Switzerland, Basel for this event? And for future conference of Hyperledger Global Forum, what will be your preferred locations and what's the criteria?
Yeah.
Because my boss, who is approving my business trip, has the same question.
I'm sure that's true for everyone. So when we started talking about doing this at the beginning of this year, so first off, the Linux Foundation has a full events team, and you've met some of them here. They're total ACE professionals. They put on over 100 events like this a year for the different Linux Foundation projects. In fact, this is the same week as an 8,000 person, if I have the number correct, 8,000 person KubeCon event taking place in Seattle that was sold out, actually. So they have this real bench strength in being able to put these events together. So we went to them and said, yeah, we want to have an event that would have the capacity for 1,000 people. You know, we thought we might get about that much. We have 700 people, which is an amazing number. It's more than I was worried we'd get at one point. Yep, very good. And that's been a lot of work from a lot of you out there to make that happen. But we said here, you know, something later in the year, something that would be as easy to get as many people to as possible, right? So we came up with options for different cities, but it's expensive to put an event on in New York City, and there's a lot of blockchain events there. Expensive to do it in London, and likewise. We felt a lot of other locations would just end up excluding a lot of participants. We thought, actually, we thought from a visa perspective, it'd be easier to get to Switzerland than anywhere else, and that ended up not being true. We've had some folks who had to cancel at the last minute because they weren't able to get visas here. But those were some of the, it was a very kind of subjective kind of process. And it was a gamble, right? And I think it's turned out pretty well. I think it is tough to travel the week before Christmas. I grant that. And even though the Linux Foundation is going to take the next 2 weeks off, and in fact, my wife and daughter are flying in this weekend, and we're spending a week here in Europe. I know that's not as much of a benefit for others. So it's a gamble. What do people think? Like, was that the right kind of gamble? Is the right kind of location? We are open to the idea of doing it at a different place, maybe even a different time of year around this time next year, maybe after the new year of next. We haven't settled again on coming back here the exact same place, the exact same time. But when we looked at the options, this Congress Center, and by the way, the Linux Foundation's team had done a few other events here successfully, had a good relationship with the facility, and that matters a ton. Just being able to produce these and have them happen well is really important. But by and large, I'm definitely open to hearing other points of view on location and timing for this event and for the next event. Yes, how about here?
Thank you, Brian. How was the agenda developed? Sometimes I felt the sponsor kind of developed or drove the agenda. Some of the topics were really off. Content was shallow. So just an idea, I mean, was there a theme in mind?
Yeah. Do we have anyone from the CFP team who wants to talk about this? Marta?
So we had...
By the way, this is Marta Piekarska,
Hi.
for those who've not met her yet. She's the Director of Ecosystems for Hyperledger.
So we wanted to have 2 tracks, business and technical, just to give a broad overview for the audience. We had a call for papers. It closed in July, I believe, mid-July, something like that. We had over 300 submissions. We could accept only 30 of them. So what we did, which was not the initial plan, was we combined some of the talks into panels. That's why you saw so many panels, because we wanted to accommodate as many people as possible, obviously. We had some sponsored tracks. That came from our gold sponsors. But most importantly, it was a blind review process that was consisting not only from Hyperledger staff, but we had a committee consisting of some of our community members that weighed in and said, you know, what they think. And then we had to narrow it down and select. So we just chose by points, really. Everybody gave them the talks points. And of course, you know, I understand that, and I've been told that already, that sometimes what the submission was describing did not reflect what the talk was about, and we'll work on that. And I'm very happy for everybody here to come to me or to Daniela or to Tracy or to Sayona to tell us what didn't work out for you and which talks were completely off limits, because we will want to talk to those people as well.
Thank you. In the back there.
So thanks a lot for putting the event. I thought it was really, really good. I came here knowing nothing about Hyperledger, like not even the difference between Sawtooth and Fabric to that level. No one does. But yeah, I talked to a lot of people, and I feel like I know a little bit more. So for that, it's good. The only comment, I think, was that the drinks were a bit tokenized, if you see what I mean. So that's my only comment, but great stuff. Thank you.
Thanks. I'll say, and this is maybe a little bit of a subtle point, but you know, I mentioned we have a focus on. I think at the keynote, a focus on diversity, civility, and inclusiveness at the Linux Foundation, and try to really carry that through in the code of conduct here at events. And one of the things that sometimes makes following those principles and having the code of conduct actually work is open bars with unlimited drinks. And so the tokenization was intentional. It wasn't just us being cheap. It has that side effect of making those kinds of events more affordable, but it really is also to try to keep this from becoming that kind of event, if that makes sense. So tokenization works. Yes, back there as well. And I'd love a diverse set of questioners as well. That'd be awesome. But go ahead.
So going to the tokenization part, I would like to make a suggestion. We have this sovereign framework for identity and stuff. So what could have been done was, you know, we have these barcodes, and you could tell
dog fooding.
So you know, we scan them, and everybody actually experiences what you know, whatever products we are building.
Yes.
And instead of having these paper tokens, maybe we could have done some sort of blockchain token thing. Just say, yeah.
Yeah, maybe we could make that a hackathon kind of contest. But let me talk a little bit. I'll use that as an opportunity to riff on one of the points I had on my wish list, which was around dog fooding. Right, so it's, you know, most open source communities find some way themselves to make use of the code that they're building in some deep way, so that the developers have a real visceral understanding of what they need to build. And when I first stepped into this project, I remember going, well, what the open source community needs is something like GitHub serves as an interesting kind of version control history for the code, but what about for things like developer certifications, you know, like we're going to be doing on the training side? What about, but even more core to open source, things like release signatures, right? So people know that if they've got a piece of code that it actually wasn't, you know, modified in transit, or you know, somebody hasn't added some backdoor or something like that. Or what about other kind of release artifacts as part of software development? Wouldn't it be interesting to do that? And then I wasn't able to do anything there, but about 6 months ago, I learned about this project that some folks at Wind River had been working on, along with Kate Stewart, who's on another Linux Foundation project, confusingly enough, called Open Chain, which again predates Hyperledger. But that is all about using SPDX files, which is kind of a metadata format for describing licensing terms, along with kind of a bill of materials, basically a way of using a distributed ledger to track the software supply chain, if you will, right? Here I've got this firmware image. It's comprised of a lot of different pieces. Where did those pieces come from? And then I give that firmware image a signature. And now, like if I deploy stuff to a router or an IoT device, I can know exactly what's in it, provably in some way. This code is now in Hyperledger Labs. It's called S-Parts, very creatively named. Again, us with the naming thing, right? We need to figure out something. And there's a great white paper associated with that as well. It's kind of a skunkworks thing, but I'd love to see some volunteers taking that on. And potentially even having kind of our staff run a couple of nodes on a network like this, maybe publishing our own artifacts to that system. Let's take a look at that, because I think that's something that could be valuable not just for Hyperledger, not even just for the Linux Foundation, but for a larger set of the open source community. And if there's other opportunities to dog food, maybe it's developer certifications and other types of certs that we'll issue, or something else out there, let us know. We're interested in this and happy to be kind of an equal contributor to setting something up like that. Let's see, who else has a question? I just want to get a sense for the room and make sure I'm not over focusing on an area. Okay, let me take this guy in the center here, and then I'll go to the right.
So, comment number one, I found the keynotes inspirational, so they were great. Number two, something you said in your keynote, that the community was very supportive and helpful. I absolutely found that.
Good.
And my one question, I cornered you right before I came in, so I appreciate you giving the public answer. I even gave a talk on Hyperledger Composer, and I wasn't paying attention to the mailing list, and I was confused about the state, and you in one sentence told me what the state was, and I'd love you to
Sure.
state of Composer.
And before I give you my take, I want to ask, is there anybody here who's one of the maintainers on Composer or a developer on it? Is Carolyn still here? Or I don't want to put her on the spot if she doesn't want to talk. Or I don't know if Chris wants to be able to say, or is that Dan? Do you want to give a statement about the current state of Composer? And tell us who you are.
Hi everyone, I'm Dan Salmon. Is Chris here? Maybe Chris would be better.
He had to catch a flight. Chris left then.
Is he here?
No, he had to take a flight.
All right. Yeah, so my name's Dan Salmon. I'm a maintainer for Composer. I used to work for IBM. I no longer work for IBM. So I'm still busy working on Composer, and recently modularized part of Composer so you can use it from Node.js chain code. That's this Concerto project that I presented this afternoon with my colleague Matt. So I think my default answer would be, it's an open source project, get involved, and you can influence the direction of it. Historically, it's been primarily contributors from IBM working on Composer. IBM's focus has shifted somewhat recently, and they're working more on base fabric. So I think it's an opportunity for the community at large to step up, and if you love Composer, please get in touch, get involved, and let's keep it going.
And let me riff on this as well to add, that's not a slag on IBM at all, right? All of our projects should get to the point where, like any open source project, you're always going to have a small set of core developers, a slightly larger group of kind of people who do patches and review some of the work and other things, and then, hopefully a long tail of other contributors as well. And part of what we should aim to get each of the different projects at Hyperledger to is that state where, developers can take a break. Not every developer can work on a single project for 27 years like Linus Torvalds, right, or should be expected to. Being able to move on, is a natural thing, and companies change directions. Companies decide to reallocate their spend. That's ordinary, that's normal. And with Composer, it was especially hard because it's a tool that's really designed, it's a design tool that has brought in a lot of new users, but getting new users over that hump to being not just maybe people who report bugs, but people who report bugs and bug fixes, to adding new features, to becoming a core developer. That's hard to do anyways, and it's something that takes concerted effort both on developers' part, maintainers' part, and even some of us at staff. But it's especially hard with projects like Composer. So what we can always use are more developers climbing that contribution curve, especially on Composer if you use it, if it has created value for you. Think about ways ways of potentially helping Dan and the other maintainers. And I'm sure Dan would welcome kind of feedback on what are ways that the Composer itself and the way that product is built can bring more people up that curve. And if there's ways, Dan, we can help, please let us know. Community management, community development is really hard. And in open source communities or elsewhere. And so we can use all the help we can get on that. And all self-transparency and self-honesty. There's a question over here, if we can get a microphone too.
Yeah, it was a great show. Thank you for putting it up. Just a suggestion maybe for the future. I think this was well represented by the community across the board. Maybe it's good to invite some customers who are not involved in the development of the platform, because at the end of the day, we are developing it for them, maybe the big banks or other the customers from the other industries, so that we get their perspectives and engage with them.
Yeah. Well, we did try to make sure this conference was a mix of developers and the business types, right? The people who are making the decisions about spending money on setting these kinds of systems up. And the door was certainly open. Sometimes it's hard to convince them to spend money to come to an event, right? When they aren't directly involved, or if they're still learning about this space. But you heard from somebody else who was here who didn't know anything about blockchain technology, or about Hyperledger at least. Who now knows quite a bit more. So anything that we can do that that we could do to be more opening to end user companies, end user organizations, we'd be happy to try to do. As a project, I'd like to think that we've been open, and even up to our governing board. You notice we have organizations like Daimler and Airbus involved as end user organizations. I think that's been a characteristic of the project for a while. Is let's make sure we're grounding what we're building. With understanding the needs of organizations that are at the tail end, so to speak, of that supply chain, right? But yeah, always open to specific ideas of what more we can do on that. Yes, I think back there in the corner.
Hey, Brian.
Hi.
Sebastian from Epicenter. I just want to say what a fantastic event this has been, and I think you guys, the entire team, deserve a big round of applause for putting on, for your first event being so successful. So.
Thanks. And to my team, definitely.
And if I could just provide some feedback, or maybe my impression, one thing that I felt perhaps could be valuable in the future, and you mentioned it during your keynote, is building those bridges and creating synergies with the other crypto and blockchain communities, and seeing more of those people coming to events like this. People from the Ethereum community, from Web3, and the other big communities that are building on blockchain would, I think, be really valuable to the people building on Hyperledger, but also the project itself. So.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I was at DevCon in Prague, trying to meet with as many people there as possible. We didn't want a big marketing presence. We didn't get a booth or anything like that. But I wanted to be there to kind of try to make sure people understood, kind of person to person, the community is open, and we've got an event coming up. But in other ways, we wanted to help them see that we had things going on, whether it's Burrow and a relationship with the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance, or it's things like Ursa, which hadn't been publicly announced by that point, but still there was enough public that I could point people to, and had a lot of positive feedback. I had nobody say, that's a bad idea, go away, you corporate overlords, or whatever. Like it was, I think the tide seems to be changing as well outside of Hyperledger, about the need for greater cooperation. The funds aren't quite so available anymore to build your entire stack yourself. And so that's pretty rewarding to see too. And I do want to highlight, I think I might have mentioned it when I mentioned Ursa in my keynote, but one of the coolest things for me is when I saw the list of names on the sponsors of the project, focusing on one of, I think it was the zero knowledge proof stuff, Hart can probably correct me, were a couple of names from Dfinity, right, which is a public ledger project. So great, please, like more use of whether it's Ursa or things like Caliper or even Cello or these other tools that are applying to Hyperledger platforms, but potentially to others, would be awesome to see. And if there's things that we can do from a messaging point of view, marketing point of view, or even just how we're structured that could also be more welcoming to people from other communities, I would love to hear. I'd love to know. Cool. Over here, Jonathan.
Hi, Brian, and hello, everybody. So just quickly, just remember the days where we just started, and we started to try to do something on Lightning Network, on Bitcoin, and then I moved to Ethereum, and then when I first started working on Hyperledger Fabric, when it was like really before 0.5, everybody thought we were all crazy. Like, why would you do a blockchain without a token? How would you get paid? Like, how do you have a company without an ICO? And a year later, when people see the regulations kick in, and then they realize that actually you need KYC and AML and permission networks actually solve a lot of other issues, it's kind of funny to see how we actually grew. And I just wanted to say thank you for everything. And like, I really like how Hyperledger and the Linux Foundation helped us, even as a small company back in the day, and still kind of express our vision and basically have a community that supports our vision of having less data silos and basically looking, just like we have the open source community where people are learning that openness is actually more secure and strength. I hope that in a year or very soon, people will realize that actually sharing data and collaboration is much more safe than having data in a silo and being too protective. And I think it's happening, so thank you.
Well, thank you. And actually, that's the perfect note to end on. I do want to thank all of our sponsors. If you're from a sponsor here, can you stand up if you're not already standing? And just allow us to thank you as well. Thanks, Rob. Thanks, Dave. I want to thank all of the speakers. If you're a speaker, if we're a speaker in a session, if you could stand up. And thank you for contributing your thought, your intellect to what we do. Awesome. And not least, of course, I want to thank my staff and the Linux Foundation events team and anyone else. All of you, please stand up. Come on, stand up. Ilona and everybody else. These are the folks. I mean, they made it feel so easy to me. Like I really, I have the best job in the world. And thank you to all of you for attending, and we'll get word out to you as soon as we can about when the next Hyperledger Global Forum will be. And with that, good night.